racism, if I'm not using environmental racism in the correct context.
Okay, so I'll take on stress first. And that is, we know that stress results in changes in our bodies. For example, stress causes our bodies to change a level of something called, there are stress hormones. Hormones can be affected by environmental chemicals. I think at the issue of environmental justice, and the need to be sure that people of all backgrounds and of all ages are treated equal, well, let's say equitably, which may be better than equal because people have different needs. And I think that it's unequivocal that some of our communities of color frequently are the ones where we have incinerators in their neighborhoods, we have the trash dumps in their neighborhoods, we have other things that don't go into the more wealthy majority neighborhoods. And that's an issue I think that we all need to continuously address.
For the New York City Light Poisoning Campaign, Healthy Homes. My question is actually addressed to Dan, how are you? And to Linda, sorry, I didn't get your last name, Doctor, and Dr. Graciano. I was just wondering, I run the New York City Light Poisoning Campaign for We Act for about 3 years now, and I have been very passionate of what I've been doing. But I'm just concerned about the fact that I know that CDC has mentioned that in other states they have lowered the level of concern, and I am just wondering, are they going to do that here in New York City? And can you give me a comment on that? Because I know for a fact everywhere I go, I let families know that there is no safe lead level. And I just want to make sure that I have some understanding of what is New York City going to do when other parts of the states have lowered their levels. The level of concern.
You know, I haven't heard the national standard, or is what CDC has said, which is 10 micrograms per deciliter. I haven't heard of any other states setting a lower limit. I think a lot of the information showing that effects occur or can be seen at lower levels than that have happened within the past couple of years. And again, it often takes a whole body of information to accumulate before, you know, a change will be made in the way. I personally think that it's kind of inexcusable that we've known for 30 or 40 years that, you know, well, certainly lead was banned in paint in 1977, I believe.
Here in 1960.
Or 78.
And here in 1960.
1960. And yet, certainly, there's still lots of lead in paints, especially in older residences. And when you remediate those residences, or you clean them up, or you do something, it's a real problem. Now, EPA has just, and Lorraine might be able to speak to that better, but has just instituted requirements for house renovations and for workers to do, you know, if there's lead in the house, there are things that they specifically have to do to prevent lead from coming out as they get rid of the old paint or they renovate or whatever, and to prevent it from exposing the people who live in that house. But I think anytime you have older housing stock, anything built before, say, before about 1980, is going to have lead paint in it.
Homes from asthma triggers, including mold, cockroaches, mice, and so forth. And unfortunately, if you're in private housing, you have a slumlord, as Ray Lopez was talking about, who doesn't know how to fix it properly, refuses to do it properly. They have no remedies right now. My understanding is the health department has these spectacular guidelines for mold remediation, but the Department of Health refuses to make them into regulations, so they're not enforceable. So my question to you is, if you are a poor person living in rental property in New York and you have asthma triggers such as cockroaches and mice or mold problems, who do you call in the city to really get the problem remedied permanently? And if there's a hole in the regulatory scheme right now, what should be changed so that we can get permanent relief for tenants who have these problems? Thank you.
Well, if you are a poor tenant in New York City with a slumlord and no response from them to fix your problem, you know, you're in a bad situation. I would sort of say a few things. First of all, I don't think the fundamental issue is the absence of regulation. I think the fundamental question and the issue that is not an easy one to solve, to be frank, at least from my sort of understanding of the range of problems, is this: that right now we've got a set of circumstances by virtue of both the economics of housing and the regulatory framework and the sort of siloing of regulatory activity, where there's the savings that property owners realize from poor maintenance and lack of preventive maintenance and lack of responsiveness essentially get cost transferred. They get cost transferred to the tenant, and they get cost transferred to the taxpayers by way of both medical expenses that are ultimately realized by tenants who are victims of the set of circumstances or who may suffer the health problems. They get transferred to tenants in the form of having to take matters into their own hands, which they sometimes ought to do, but sometimes ought not have to do, in the form of everything from cleaning to pesticide use to hiring their own pest control firms to legal bills for taking things to housing court. And they get transferred to taxpayers in another way, which is by basically sort of compelling the kind of the stopgap measures to pick it up, like health departments and housing agencies and others. So, what is the right solution? Is from a public policy perspective, do we basically provide a set of nearly infinite funds to regulators who basically step in, do it themselves, sort of write violation after violation that may or may not get solved or sort of answered by landlords? That's certainly an option. It's sort of the public can decide whether that's the way they want to do it. Do we change the specter or the scenario where tenants regain some power, in housing court to get these things together? Do we revive organizing strategies so that a tenant is never by themselves, but that the problem that they experience in Unit 5H that's experienced by everyone on the first, second, and seventh floor, get managed collectively? Honestly, I'm not sure what the right solution is. I know that our role and the guidelines that you're describing are written just that way. They're sort of guidelines for owners and building managers to basically guess at or take some informed guess at what the best way to think about the extent of a mold problem is, and a set of solutions that may be sort of appropriate to remedy that. They're not written as regulations. We also, similarly, and I'll acknowledge this, we have health code language in New York City that is probably second to none around pest management, that attempts, despite the preemption of state and federal law against us in regulating the use of pesticides or in regulating the pest control industry, that attempts to get purchasers of those services to recognize that that preventive maintenance needs to be the same thing. But we can't be in every home. We can't respond to every complaint, and so I think the answer is to, as much as we can in settings like this and in others and in other forums in which we've appeared together, to basically, attempt to both put the fear, into otherwise recalcitrant owners and sometimes problematic tenants, as well as to educate them.